Hey, it's Pink Buddha and welcome back to another episode of Force Fridays. If you missed the other ones in the series, you can click up here to get caught up and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next one. So last week I did a video, top 5 things that I love about the Force. I also did the top 5 things that I don't like, but it was too long, so I thought I'd chop it up and make it its own video. So here it is. Okay, let's talk about the cons, the things that I would love for Akai to work on. Number 5 relates to the Ableton integration. Now, if you don't use Ableton, this is not going to be a big deal to you, so you can just skip ahead to the next one. But while I love the fact that you have this integration with Ableton, I mentioned it as a runner-up to my top 5, and in particular now that you can use this section down here to control clips. These are 2 clips in my Ableton session that I have open, and as I move this around, it scrolls through it the same way that a Launchpad does or the push does. But what is sorely missing is the ability to have those pads that you can play. I don't even care if they have the split screen. If you were seeing them both at the same time, that would be wonderful if you could do that with Ableton through the Force. But at least just to be able to use this as a way of playing the drum racks. I mean, I have a Akai MPD that I can pull out to do that, but I'd love to just do it on the Force. That's really the one thing that keeps me from having this set up and using it in Ableton all the time, is that lack of being able to play the drum racks. Number 4 feature that I really don't like about the Force is that you can't rearrange the order of the effects that you have in each track. Maybe there's just some sort of problem with being able to click on that and move them around to change the order. It would seem like this page would be a great one that you could do that either by pushing on the screen and moving it around. Maybe that's too much to ask of it from a programming standpoint, but maybe at least to click here with an arrow button that you could move up and down. But it's a really big limitation because it requires you to think too far ahead. And when you're creating music, you're not always thinking that far ahead. You're really in the moment. And so I am constantly trying to leave space in between some of these plugins when I insert them, because, for example, the mother ducker, the sidechain compression, do I want that to be at the end of the chain? Well, maybe sometimes at the end of the chain I want there to be a maximizer, a limiter in the whole thing, and so that needs to be at the end versus somewhere in the middle. But if I put reverb on, having it before or after the sidechain compression makes a huge difference in the way this sounds. Problem is, once you make a decision to insert that on the track, that's where it stays. You have to then delete it, move the other one around. That is just way more programming than is necessary. So Kai, please fix this. And in a similar vein, that brings me to number 3 thing that I don't like about the Force is you can't do the same thing with the track order. Once you put it in a track, that's where it will stay. There's a kind of a workaround related to it, but it's just such a pain in the butt in that you could copy this one, let's say number 2 here to number 5. So it duplicates that track. I could come into number 2 and delete that. Everything scoots over and I could kind of play this like leapfrog game where I'm like copying a track, deleting them, and it feels like one of those games where it's like the chicken and the fox that's crossing the river in a boat and you got to figure out which one's going to sit in there with you and what order it's going to go in to make sure they don't eat each other. Anybody heard this at all? Anyways. Okay, apparently I can't count or follow my notes very well when I'm making a video because I left out number 2. So here it is. While I am super happy that these newer updates have made the Force into a kind of MIDI hub in that you can hook up an external keyboard or a controller like this and assign these pads, let's say, to a particular track, no matter what you're doing on the Force's surface, or if you have another keyboard, or if you have other synth devices, all that's amazing. But there's one element that's missing that is so disappointing, is that you can't do any CC automation from like knobs like this or sliders. To be able to use these knobs here to affect macros or other CC controls would be so amazing. And I just don't understand why it's missing. It's not like this is new technology. I mean, many devices do external CC control. So, oh, so disappointing. And number 1 thing that I really am upset about with regard to the Force, especially because they gave us this wonderful gift of the macros and the fact that you can have these project knobs making all these types of controls, they made it look like false advertising, that when you're recording your performance and you got everything just right, that it's all going to be saved into the arranged view. And that is mostly true if it's about effects on specific tracks. But if you have any sort of macro level, which, you know, macro's macro level, on the master track, like maybe a filter or an XY pad, those types of things that you want affecting every single sound in your session, or for certain buses maybe as well, it will not record this automation into the arrange view. And there is a sort of workaround in that you can just put all those effects on the individual tracks and then use the macros and the knobs to map to all those parameters. And then it would record those things for you. So for example, if you wanted one knob to turn a filter on the whole session and to record that into the range view, you'd have to put a filter, wasting space on each one of your tracks, on each one of them, map that knob to the filter on each one of those tracks, all this taking time. Then when you turn the knob, it's going to record that on automation onto each track. The problem is you're going to do all that work. You could save it as a template, but it's very hard to pull up with any other track you might do. That kind of like high level effects manipulation through knobs and whatnot is something you want as a template on the master track or buses. So no matter what song you're doing, you always have that at your disposal. Sure, you could build that from scratch for every single piece that you're doing. And if there were effects racks you had for macros, that would be great, but there's not. So it kind of makes the range view sort of useless to me, because I really use some effects that go over all the tracks, either on buses or on the master track. That's a big way of how I organize myself in the Force and in Ableton. This is like standard music production stuff. So it feels like a very blaring oversight that Akai didn't think about the need to automate that. Maybe it's coming, so I don't want to jump the gun. If that's on a future update, we'd be very happy with that. But all right, so let's talk. Do you agree with me about these top 5 things, or would you have replaced it with something different? Let me know in the comments below, and we'll see you next week.